There are places in America where the past refuses to stay buried. Small towns with forgotten railways. Abandoned stations where the wind carries whispers of what once was. This is a story about one such place, Pinehaven, Montana, a town where a signal still broadcasts from a train that disappeared 40 years ago. A story about obsession, guilt, and the terrible weight of secrets. What you're about to hear is based on events that locals still refuse to discuss. Welcome to the Static from Pinehaven Station. Before we begin, let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? I love hearing from viewers around the world who share a passion for these dark, mysterious tales. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We have many more disturbing mysteries coming your way, and you won't want to miss a single one. Now, let's step into the cold mountain air of Pinehaven, Montana, where the truth is far more horrifying than any legend. The town of Pinehaven sits in a valley between the Bitterroot Mountains, a place where winter arrives early and stays late. Population 312. One general store, one bar, one church, and one abandoned railway station at the edge of town, where the tracks disappear into the forest like a scar running through the landscape. Marcus Webb arrived in Pinehaven on a gray October afternoon in 2019, his Subaru rattling over the uneven road that led into town. At 34, Marcus was a podcaster specializing in unsolved mysteries, though specializing was generous. His show, Signal Lost, had fewer than 2,000 subscribers, and his last 3 episodes had barely broken 100 downloads each. He was running out of money, running out of time, and running out of stories. But Pinehaven was different. Pinehaven had the train. Marcus had first heard about it 6 months earlier, buried in a forum dedicated to railroad anomalies. The post was brief. Static transmission still broadcasting from Pinehaven Station, Montana. Train disappeared 1979. No bodies ever found. Locals won't talk about it. He'd spent weeks researching, finding only fragments. The Northern Pacific Line train number 447 departed Missoula on November 12, 1979, bound for Spokane. 87 passengers, crew of 5. Somewhere between Missoula and the Idaho border, the train vanished. No wreckage, no survivors, just static on the emergency frequency that, according to reports, continued for years afterward. The case went cold, the railway company went bankrupt, and Pinehaven, the last station where the train should have stopped but never did, became a ghost town in all but name. Marcus pulled into the gravel parking lot of the Pinehaven Inn, a 2-story structure that looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 70s. The wind cut through his jacket as he stepped out, carrying the smell of pine and something else, something metallic, like old rust or dried blood. Inside, the lobby was dim and smelled of coffee and old carpet. Behind the desk sat a woman in her 60s, gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, eyes that tracked Marcus with the wariness of someone who'd seen too many outsiders arrive with questions. "Help you?" she asked, her voice flat. "I'd like a room, please. Just for a few nights." She studied him for a long moment, then slid a registration card across the desk. $50 a night. Cash only. "What brings you to Pinehaven?" Marcus hesitated. In his experience, small towns either loved or hated mystery tourists. "Just passing through. Doing some photography of old railway stations." The woman's expression didn't change. "Station's been closed for 40 years. Nothing to photograph but rust and rot." "That's exactly what I'm looking for." She handed him a key attached to a heavy brass fob. "Room 12. Upstairs. End of the hall. Checkout's at 10. She paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Word of advice. Stay away from the station after dark. Animals get aggressive out there. Mountain lions mostly." Marcus forced a smile. "Thanks for the warning." As he turned toward the stairs, the woman spoke again, softer this time. "You're not the first to come here asking about the train, but you might be smart enough to be the last." If the room was exactly what Marcus expected. Faded floral wallpaper, a bed that sagged in the middle, a window that overlooked the main street. He dropped his bag on the bed and pulled out his laptop, opening the folder labeled Pinehaven Research. The official investigation report was sparse. Train 447 departed Missoula at 6:47 p.m. on November 12, 1979. Last radio contact was at 8:15 p.m., approximately 30 miles west of Pinehaven. The engineer, Thomas Garrett, reported normal conditions, then nothing. When the train failed to arrive at Spokane, search parties were dispatched. They found nothing. No derailment, no debris. No sign the train had ever passed through, but there was the static. Multiple witnesses reported hearing a continuous transmission on the emergency frequency, 121.5 MHz. The signal was strongest near Pinehaven Station, Railway officials investigated but found no equipment malfunction. The transmission continued for months, then years, gradually fading but never stopping completely. Marcus had brought a radio scanner capable of picking up the frequency. If the signal was still broadcasting, he'd find it. He spent the rest of the afternoon walking through town, camera in hand, playing the role of the curious photographer. Pinehaven was dying. That much was obvious. Half the storefronts on Main Street were empty, windows soaped over or boarded up. The few people he saw moved with the slow, deliberate pace of those who'd long since stopped expecting anything to change. At the general store, an older man with a weather-beaten face and hands like leather glanced at Marcus's camera. "You hear about the train?" Marcus tried to look confused. "Train?" The man snorted. "Don't play dumb, son. Every few years, someone like you shows up. Podcast people, YouTube people, all looking for the same thing." He leaned closer, his breath smelling of tobacco. "Let me save you some time. There's nothing to find. That train's gone, and whatever happened out there is going to stay out there. Best you move on before you regret coming. I'm just taking pictures of old. I know what you're doing." The man's eyes were hard now. "And I'm telling you, for your own good, leave it alone." Marcus bought a bottle of water and left, his heart beating faster. The defensiveness, the warnings, it all confirmed what he'd suspected. Pinehaven was hiding something. The railway station stood at the eastern edge of town, past the last cluster of houses, where the pavement gave way to gravel and the forest pressed close. Marcus arrived just before sunset, the sky turning the color of a bruise. The station was a relic, a single-story wooden structure with a peaked roof, windows broken or missing, door hanging on one hinge. The platform was overgrown with weeds, and the tracks stretched away in both directions, rusty but intact, disappearing into the trees. Marcus set up his equipment on the platform, the radio scanner, a digital recorder, and his camera. As the last light faded, he turned on the scanner and began sweeping through frequencies. Static, white noise, nothing. He adjusted the antenna, fine-tuning the range around 121.5 MHz. The cold seeped through his jacket, and his breath came out in visible puffs. The forest was completely silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just the wind moving through the pines. Then he heard it, faint at first, buried under layers of static but unmistakable. A rhythmic pulse, not random interference. Not natural. It sounded almost like Morse code, but irregular, broken. Marcus's hands trembled as he adjusted the frequency. The signal grew stronger, clearer, and beneath the pulse, something else. A voice. No, voices. Multiple voices talking over each other, too distorted to make out words, but definitely human. He pressed record on his digital device, his heart hammering. This was it. This was the evidence everyone said didn't exist. The voices continued for nearly 3 minutes, rising and falling in intensity. Then, abruptly, they stopped. The static returned, flat and lifeless. Marcus played back the recording, adjusting the equalization, trying to isolate the voices. On the fourth playback, he caught a single word, clear enough to make him freeze. "Help!" Then another word, different voice, "station," and a third, barely audible, "inside." Marcus looked up at the abandoned station building, its dark windows like empty eyes. The door hung open, leading to nothing but shadow. He should leave. Every instinct told him to pack up and go back to the inn. But this was exactly what he'd come for. Proof, evidence, a story that would finally put his podcast on the map. He grabbed his flashlight and approached the building. The interior of the station was worse than the exterior. Floorboards rotted through in places, ceilings sagging, everything covered in decades of dust and animal droppings. The waiting area was small, with a ticket counter on one side and benches long since collapsed into piles of termite-eaten wood. Marcus swept his flashlight across the room. Graffiti covered the walls, tags, crude drawings, and, oddly, a series of tally marks, hundreds of them, scratched into the plaster near the ticket window. He approached the marks, running his fingers over them. They were deep, deliberate, made with something sharp. Below them, barely visible under layers of dirt, words were carved into the wall. "They kept us waiting." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. He took photographs, documenting everything, then moved toward the back of the station. A door marked "Employees Only" stood partially open. Beyond it, a narrow hallway led deeper into the building. Marcus's flashlight beam caught more graffiti, more tally marks. The air grew colder, and that metallic smell he'd noticed earlier grew stronger. At the end of the hallway, another door. This one was newer than the others, the wood less weathered. Someone had been here recently. Marcus tried the handle, locked. He examined the door frame, then threw his shoulder against it. The wood splintered, and the door swung inward, revealing stairs leading down into darkness. A basement. The station had a basement. Marcus descended carefully, each step creaking under his weight. The walls were concrete, and the temperature dropped with every step. At the bottom, his flashlight revealed a large room, maybe 30 feet across, with a low ceiling supported by thick wooden beams. And in the center of the room, something that made Marcus's blood turn to ice. A radio transmitter, old, but well-maintained. Cables ran from it to a car battery, still operational. The equipment was broadcasting. He could see the indicator lights glowing in the darkness. Someone had been keeping the signal alive. Marcus moved closer, his mind racing. This didn't make sense. If someone was maintaining the transmitter, that meant the static wasn't a remnant from 1979. It was current, intentional. He examined the equipment more closely. Beside the transmitter, a reel-to-reel tape player, also connected to the battery. The tape was old, the oxide flaking, but it was running, looping the same recording over and over. The voices he'd heard weren't live. They were a recording from 40 years ago. But why? Who was maintaining this? And what were they hiding? Marcus heard a sound behind him, a footstep on the stairs. He spun around, flashlight raised, and found himself face to face with the woman from the inn. But she wasn't alone. Behind her stood two men, both wearing heavy coats and carrying flashlights of their own. "I told you to stay away from here," the woman said, her voice heavy with something that might have been regret. Marcus backed up, his hand instinctively reaching for his phone. "What is this? What are you people doing?" One of the men, tall, with a thick beard and eyes that reflected no light, stepped forward. "You shouldn't have come here. You shouldn't have listened to the signal. I don't understand. The train. What happened to the train?" The woman sighed, a sound full of decades of weight. "There never was a train, not the way you think. Sit down, Mr. Webb. You're going to want to hear this." Marcus didn't sit. "I'm leaving, right now." The bearded man pulled something from his coat. Not a weapon, but a photograph, old and faded. He held it up to the light. "That's my father," he said. "Thomas Garrett, engineer on train 447. Except there was no train 447 that night. The railway company made it up." Marcus stared at the photograph, then at the man. "What are you talking about?" The woman spoke again. "November 12th, 1979. There was supposed to be a train, but the railway company was bankrupt, cutting corners everywhere. They canceled the route, but didn't tell anyone. Didn't refund tickets. Didn't notify the stations. 87 people showed up at Missoula Station that night, ready to board a train that didn't exist. But the investigation covered it up," the bearded man said. "The railway company couldn't admit they'd left passengers stranded. Couldn't admit they'd sold tickets for a route they'd already canceled. So they invented a story. A train that departed. A train that vanished. A mystery that could never be solved because there was nothing to solve." Marcus felt like the ground was tilting beneath him. But the people, the 87 passengers, what happened to them? The woman's expression darkened. "The company paid them off. Hush money. Threatened them with lawsuits if they talked. Most took the money and disappeared. But some," she paused, "some wouldn't stay quiet. My husband was one of them. He was supposed to be on that train, taking our daughter to see her grandmother in Spokane. What did they do to the people who wouldn't stay quiet? Silence. The kind that answers questions without words." The second man, who hadn't spoken yet, finally did. His voice was quiet, sad. "My mother was one of the passengers. She refused the money. She was going to go to the newspapers, tell everyone what the company had done. 3 weeks later, she disappeared. The police said she left town, but we knew. We all knew." Marcus's mind was reeling. "So the static, the transmitter, you've been keeping the story alive, broadcasting a fake signal to make people think the train really did vanish." "No," the woman said sharply. "We broadcast the signal to remind ourselves, to remind this town. That recording you heard, those are real voices. Recordings from the station that night, passengers waiting for a train that never came. We keep it playing so we never forget what the company did, what they took from us." "But why threaten me? Why not just tell people the truth?" The bearded man's expression hardened. "Because the truth is worse than the legend. The railway company is long gone, but the people who covered it up, some of them are still around, still powerful, still willing to protect their secrets. We learned that the hard way." He gestured to the walls, and for the first time, Marcus noticed what he'd missed before. Names, hundreds of them, carved into the concrete, names and dates. "These are the people who came looking for the truth," the woman said. "Journalists, investigators, people like you. Some left town and never spoke about it again. Some—" She didn't finish the sentence. Marcus felt sick. "Are you threatening me?" "No," the woman said. "We're warning you. There are people who don't want this story told. People who will do whatever it takes to keep it buried. We've been maintaining this signal for 40 years. not to attract attention, but to keep the memory alive for ourselves, for the families who lost people. But every few years, someone like you hears about it and comes looking for answers. And what happens to them? That depends, the bearded man said, on whether they're smart enough to walk away. Marcus looked at the three of them, then at the transmitter, still broadcasting its endless loop of static and ghostly voices, a recording of passengers waiting for salvation that never arrived. What do you want me to do? The woman stepped closer. We want you to leave Pinehaven, delete your recordings, forget you ever heard about this place. The train is gone. The people are gone. Let them stay gone. And if I don't? The second man spoke again, his voice carrying a weight that made Marcus's skin crawl. Then you'll become one of the names on the wall, another person who came looking for the truth and found something worse. Marcus left Pinehaven the next morning, driving faster than the mountain roads allowed, his equipment still in the back seat, his recordings still on his hard drive. But he didn't publish them. He didn't even listen to them again. Because as he'd walked back to the inn that night, flashlight cutting through the darkness, he'd seen something that the woman and her companions hadn't mentioned. Behind the station, barely visible in the overgrown grass, were markers. Not gravestones, those would have drawn too much attention. Just small wooden crosses, weathered by decades of wind and rain. 87 of them. Marcus understood then what had really happened. The passengers hadn't been paid off. They hadn't been threatened or relocated. They'd been erased, permanently, by a company that couldn't afford a scandal and people willing to do whatever was necessary to protect that secret. And Pinehaven, the whole town, had become the guardians of that secret. Not because they wanted to hide the truth, but because they were terrified of it. Because they knew that acknowledging what had happened would mean acknowledging their own complicity, their own silence. The static wasn't a signal from a lost train. It was a warning, a reminder, a ghost story that the living kept alive to justify the dead staying buried. Marcus deleted his recordings 3 days after leaving Montana. He shut down his podcast 2 weeks later, and he never spoke about Pinehaven again. But sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and sleep won't come, he still hears it, the static, the voices underneath, calling for help that never arrived. And he wonders how many other small towns across America are hiding similar secrets. How many disappeared trains and vanished passengers exist only as legends, their true stories buried beneath layers of lies and fear. Pinehaven Station still stands, the transmitter still broadcasts, and the crosses behind the building still mark graves that officially don't exist. The town's population has dropped to 281 now. People leave, but no one new arrives. And if you ever find yourself driving through western Montana, through the valleys between the Bitterroot Mountains, and you see a sign for Pinehaven, keep driving. Don't stop for gas. Don't stop for food. Don't stop at all, because some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Some signals aren't meant to be heard. And some towns carry secrets so dark that the only way to survive them is to become part of the darkness yourself. The static still broadcasts. The voices still call. And Pinehaven still waits, guarding its dead and warning the living. Stay away, stay quiet, and never ever ask about the train.